They know the ups and downs. They know how to manage it. And American politicians shouldn't get ahead of our skis. We shouldn't be pushing for things that Taiwanese politicians don't. As I understood Taiwan leaders, they want to build their defense, but they also want engagement still with China. They don't want a departure from the status quo. And if we affirm that, I think a war can be avoided.
What do you make of the fact about the recent local elections in Taiwan in which the KMT, which is the party that's known to be closer to Beijing or soft on Beijing, they won many of these recent local elections, and there is every possibility that this party could win the general elections in Taiwan, which are due next year. Could that reduce the possibility of some kind of armed conflict between China?
Welcome back. The long-lying vacant post of U.S. ambassador to India has finally been filled. Eric Garcetti's appointment was cleared by the senators, and he'll be America's next envoy to India. U.S. President Joe Biden had nominated him for the post in July 2021, but he was held up partly due to controversies surrounding the handling of allegations of sexual harassment against an aide when he was the mayor. Since January 2021, the United States has not had an ambassador to New Delhi, an important post as Washington looks to India as an essential partner in its effort to push back against the Chinese expanding their power and influence. The senators voted 52-42, with 3 Democrats voting no, along with most Republicans. 7 Republicans, interestingly, joined with the majority of the Democrats in the voting of a yes. So let's first tell you about who is Eric Garcetti then. He's known as U.S. President Joe Biden's loyalist. He served as the president of LA Council from 2006 to 12. He was then the mayor of Los Angeles from 2013 to 2022. He was also the youngest mayor of LA in about 100 years. Last few years of his mayoral term were rocked by various scandals. Now, the reason his appointment has been delayed by as long as about 2 years is because of certain controversies he's been involved into. Back home in U.S., he's been criticized for homelessness in LA, criticized for defending the police after George Floyd case. Garcetti's aide faced serious charges of sexual harassment, and he was accused of ignoring all these allegations of misconduct while he was the mayor. What may be concerning for India is actually his alleged China link. That's the angle we'll talk about. Garcetti allegedly met with several front groups of the CCP. He is also accused of meeting Chinese intel group members. Garcetti allegedly got political funds from CCP groups. In 2020, he received about $1 million as mayoral funds from CCP group. And more specifically about India, his comments in the past over so-called human rights issues in India have also raised various eyebrows and questions. In the context of the anti-CEA protests in India, he said, and I'm quoting, "I intend to directly engage with the civil society in India." He went on to say that few groups actively fighting for human rights in India, and he's going to support them. He said that these groups will get direct engagement from me. Further quoting him and what he said at that point in time, the CAA will be the core piece of engagement with Indian counterparts, and he was talking about supporting all the people who were opposing this legislation here in India. Well, that's all about Eric Garcetti and his history. He's the latest envoy to India, and let's see how that engagement works out to be. Well, with that, it's a wrap. Thanks for watching.
Has sort of split the entire international community down the middle. The way it's being viewed from Washington or London or Kiev is very, very different from how it's being viewed in a New Delhi or a Tel Aviv or a Dubai, leave alone how it's being viewed in Beijing and in Moscow.
I think there's a consensus that what Putin did is wrong, that Putin's invasion in Ukraine was a violation of territorial sovereignty. And I think India understands that best. I mean, India doesn't like it when China violates the line of control in Arunachal Pradesh. Any nation that is non-expansionist, India has been a non-expansionist nation, should respect sovereignty. And the last thing you want is great powers running roughshod, taking land. I think the question then is, how do you have a just peace? And there are differences of opinion. And how do you make sure that the Russian economy is not facilitating this war. And of course, that's where there's been disagreements with the United States. But my hope is that India ultimately will be part of the solution in having Russia recognize that they can't take Ukraine's sovereignty and having a just peace.
All right. Congressman Ro Khanna, thank you very much for speaking with us here on CNN News 18. Appreciate your time. Thank you. It's almost like a ticking clock, this possibly imminent clash between China and Taiwan. China, of course, has incorporated in its constitution that it has to acquiesce Taiwan by any means possible, even if it means by forceful means. The United States, the biggest superpower in the world, has said that that is an absolute red line. Joining me now is an Indian-American congressman, someone who has recently been to Taiwan and who knows a thing or two about what's going on in this part of the world. Ro Khanna is a U.S. congressman. Thank you very much, sir, for speaking with us here on CNN News 18. I want to start with the most pressing clash that's happening in the world right now and which has divided the entire world, which is Russia-Ukraine. I want your assessment of where the war stands right now. Do you see any road to peace as of today?
Well, first of all, the world of democracies.
Hello, Namaskar. This is First Post and you're watching Vantage with me, Palki Sharma. Do you know what the term bank on means? It means to depend on or count on someone or something. Ironically, you cannot bank on banks anymore. They're going down like 9 pins. Last week, 2 American banks collapsed. Now a major Swiss bank is on the brink. At pains to reassure investors that all is well. Tonight, we'll tell you what went wrong with Credit Suisse and how many American banks may meet the same fate. Also on the show, the rising threat of a direct war between NATO and Russia. Yesterday, we told you about Russia downing an American drone. Tonight, we'll tell you what happened next. In Libya, 10 drums of nuclear material has gone missing. In Paris, love is no more in the air. It's the stink of 7,000 tons of garbage. We'll tell you more. The headlines first. The U.S. releases dramatic video of its drone collision with a Russian fighter jet over the Black Sea as American and Russian defense chiefs hold rare telephonic talks, their second since the war in Ukraine began. North Korea fires an intercontinental ballistic missile. It's the third missile test by Pyongyang this week. It was fired hours before South Korea's president flew to Japan for the first summit between the two countries in years. And speaking of South Korea, its government backpedals on its proposed 69-hour work week plan amid backlash. People complained that such a move would put their health at risk and hamper the government's plan to boost its population. Syrian President Bashar al-Assad rules out talks with Turkey. Assad says he will only meet with President Erdogan if Turkey withdraws its troops from Syria. This comes a day after the Syrian president met his Russian counterpart, Vladimir Putin. After 2 years, the U.S. finally appoints an ambassador to India. Biden loyalist Eric Garcetti, the former mayor of Los Angeles, is set to take charge. Garcetti's name was first announced for the post in 2021. And the US wants TikTok to part ways with its Chinese parent ByteDance. The popular video sharing app claims that American officials say it's the only way to avoid a national ban in the US. We start with the banking crisis. It is spilling out of America. Last week, 2 US banks collapsed. It set off a chain reaction. Now another bank is on the brink. We are talking about global investment bank Credit Suisse. Yesterday, its share price tanked. It dropped by more than 30%. And this is a record low. The stock was worth less than 2 Swiss francs. That's a little over $2. And this fall is bigger than the Silicon Valley Bank because Credit Suisse is a much bigger bank. It is among the top 30 lenders in the world. And if this bank fails, the world economy will feel the impact, much more than it already is feeling. So why is Credit Suisse in trouble? It started with the collapse of the Silicon Valley Bank in the US. The episode alerted regulators. They began asking questions from banks, and this is happening across the world. The global banking system is under scrutiny. Credit Suisse was also under the lens, and it could not pass that test. Earlier this week, Credit Suisse made an admission. U.S. regulators had posed some questions to this bank. They were inquiring about the bank's books, specifically the cash flow statements for 2019 and 2020. Now, what is a cash flow statement? It is a record of the money that comes in and goes out of the business. American regulators wanted to know about the cash flow of Credit Suisse, and the bank admitted that there were some lapses. Material weaknesses, that's the term they used. There were material weaknesses. And this was about how the bank reported its finances. There were lapses, and Credit Suisse released a statement. In fact, let me quote from that statement. As of December 31st, 2022, the group's internal control over financial reporting was not effective. Now, let me say this here. There is no indication that Credit Suisse reported incorrect numbers. This is more about the bank's internal processes, the checks and balances. Credit Suisse says they're not good enough. But this admission proved to be costly. You see, in the world of finance, even the hint of something being wrong can spark fears.
Well, I think with Credit Suisse, you've had a perfect storm. It started with SVB, Silicon Valley Bank, over the weekend, and then the Signature Bank failure. And Credit Suisse has experienced some of the same challenges that those banks have in terms of deposit withdrawals.
So that's how it all began. Credit Suisse was supposed to release its annual report. It was delayed, and yesterday it became worse. A major investor gave a virtual thumbs down to the bank. This is the Saudi National Bank. It is the biggest shareholder in Credit Suisse. Last year, it picked up a 9.8% stake. There was talk that the Saudis could invest more. But yesterday, the chairman of the Saudi National Bank dismissed the idea. He was asked about Credit Suisse and whether the Saudi bank will buy more shares. And this was his response. I'm quoting again. The answer is absolutely not, for many reasons. I will cite the simplest reason, which is regulatory and statutory. So basically, he's blaming regulation and more. And that statement triggered the nosedive. Shares tanked. At one point, it was trading below $2. Later in the day, the stock price recovered, but the troubles for Credit Suisse are far from over. There is a credibility crisis. The bank is trying hard to prove that it's not in trouble. It announced some radical decisions today. It has borrowed $54 billion from the Swiss Central Bank. What is this money for? To shore up the finances of Credit Suisse. And they do not really need this money, but they're playing safe. In case there are more withdrawals, they'll have enough cash to take care of it. The funding from the central bank is going to be useful. Also, Credit Suisse is repaying its debt in advance. It has plans to offer a buyback. What is a buyback? It is a form of borrowing where bonds are sold with an agreement to repurchase them at a later date. That is a buyback. The bank could settle loans worth $3 billion. The idea is to boost sentiment and to convey the message that all is well. And the Swiss Central Bank is helping in this. It says Credit Suisse is sound. Let me quote from their statement. Their statement about Credit Suisse, it says, it meets the capital and liquidity requirements imposed on systemically important banks. So if everything is sound, why is the bank making such aggressive moves? Why does it face the crisis of credibility? That's because of its record. Over the years, this bank has faced a host of scandals. In Bulgaria, it allowed drug dealers to launder money. In Mozambique, the bank faced a corruption case. Then there was a spying scandal. The bank snooped on its top executives. Last year, there was a massive data leak, and all these scandals led to losses. Credit Suisse has lost several clients. The bank was trying to regain lost confidence, but now people are betting on it to fail. This week, the bank's credit default swaps hit a record. Now, what is a credit default swap? It is an insurance against failing debt, but it can be used to make a bet too, a bet that the company might fail.
Credit Suisse has been a story that's been playing out for a number of years over time, but it's still generally a story of bad, corporate management, and investors are now focused on it, and people are thinking about counterparty risk as well as risky assets. And Credit Suisse is now kind of top of mind as people focus on banks within their portfolio and what they have exposure to.
The global banking sector is in panic mode. Investors are worried. The sentiment has changed. People now feel that banks are a risky investment. And they have good reasons to be afraid. Remember, it all began in the US. Last week, 2 American banks collapsed, the Silicon Valley Bank and the Signature Bank. And it's not over yet. One more American bank could be on the brink. It's called the First Republic Bank. It is based in San Francisco. It is worth almost $6 billion. The bank has around 6,300 employees and several high-profile customers. But First Republic may not have enough money. Leading ratings agencies have downgraded this bank. We're talking about S&P Global and Fitch. They have downgraded the bank and now rate it as junk. You may ask why. Why was the bank tagged as junk? Same reason as before. Ratings agencies feel the bank could face a cash crunch, that depositors would want to pull their money out and the bank may not have enough to give them. Which is exactly what happened at the Silicon Valley Bank. There was a bank run. Depositors rushed to withdraw cash. The bank was not liquid enough, meaning it did not have enough free cash. That's because the deposits were tied up in government bonds and their value had decreased. With First Republic, we could see a repeat of this. Experts are flashing the same warning signs again. First Republic stock price has fluctuated in the past week. At one point, it was down by over 60%. Reports say First Republic is now looking at its options. It could try to raise cash to improve liquidity. It could even look to sell the bank. And these are extreme measures. They give an indication of how much trouble the bank could be in. And this may not be a unique case.
First Republic Bank is not the first canary in the mine, but there are canaries that are now feed up, and those include things like Silicon Valley Bank, Signature Bank, and lots of worry about Credit Suisse, a storied financial institution.
Let me rephrase what he's saying. There are many banks in trouble, some more than the others. We've already told you about Credit Suisse. So who else is in trouble? Credit ratings agency Moody's has released a list. It includes Western Alliance Bank Corp, Intrust Financial Corp, UMB Financial Corp, Zions Bank Corp, and Comerica Inc. All these banks are said to be unhealthy. What is their problem? Uninsured deposits of customers and unrealized losses, meaning potential losses. They're still on the books of these banks. And this is just one list. The crisis could be bigger than it appears right now. And I'll tell you why I say this. American banks recently made some filings, and this is what they show. Major banks have taken some serious losses. I have some numbers. 160 major American banks have lost at least $206 billion. These are banks with more than $5 billion in assets. Every bank on this list has assets worth over $5 billion. Again, these are unrealized losses, meaning the banks continue to own these loss-making assets. They haven't been sold yet, but their value has gone down. So if they're sold today, the banks will suffer a loss. And how did these losses happen? Courtesy the US government. These are mostly government securities, US treasuries we're talking about. These are bonds that the government issues. We've discussed this before on the show. Banks park their cash deposits in government bonds. It is considered a safe investment. The calculation is that when you sell these bonds, you will make more money. But in this case, the value of US government bonds has gone down. How? Last year, the US Treasury hiked interest rates. They issued new bonds. They offered a higher interest rate. So the old bonds lost their value. And these banks that we're talking about have old bonds. Now they're trading in the red. For some banks like Silicon Valley, the losses were simply too big. Silicon Valley lost almost $2 billion on a single sale. The bank needed this money to pay back depositors. It sold bonds for losses, so other depositors got worried. They came to take their cash. The bank did not have that cash, so it collapsed. And this fall had a cascading effect. America's biggest banks have seen losses. All of them have lost money in US government bonds. Citigroup lost $47 billion. Bank of America, $21.2 billion. JP Morgan Chase, $17.3 billion. Truist Financial lost $13.6 billion, Wells Fargo $13.4 billion, and US Bank Corp $11.4 billion. These losses are as per the last round of filings. The present value of these assets could be different, but the situation is unlikely to have changed significantly. And these are big banks we're talking about. They can take such losses. The smaller ones would not survive something like this. Their fate is yet to be decided. The question is, who is responsible for this crisis? How did this happen? Some experts blame the US Federal Reserve for this. The US Federal Reserve is America's central bank. They say the US Fed has cracked the financial system.
The Fed is in a tough position. Bank runs are pretty quick. The Fed has limited tools to deal with inflation, and they've been using a wrecking ball, not a scaffold.
Instead of a scalpel, they used a wrecking ball. Sounds a lot like America. And now they're suffering and making the world suffer with them. Our next story begins with a stunning video. It has been released by the United States. This is what happened on Tuesday over the Black Sea. What you see is a Russian Su-27 fighter jet approaching the American MQ-9 drone. The Russian jet is releasing aviation fuel in the drone's path, and it's releasing a lot of it. At some point, the drone's camera stops working. This is dramatic footage for the dramatic times we live in. We've all heard tales from the Cold War, a dangerous era of tensions between two superpowers, the United States and the Soviet Union. They came very close to an actual all-out war. There were quite a few close nuclear calls too. There were times when both sides came close to pushing the nuclear button. The biggest example is the Cuban Missile Crisis of 1962. Today, the Soviet Union does not exist, but Russia does. And Russia is pitted against the United States. There is high tension. A Russian jet striking down an American drone is a big deal. Things escalated soon after. British and German fighter jets were scrambled to intercept a Russian aircraft. This was close to Estonia's airspace. Reports say a Russian military aircraft was seen flying close to Estonia's airspace. Now, Estonia is a NATO member state, and NATO's rules are quite clear on this. If one member is threatened or attacked, the alliance responds as one. So as the action shifted near Estonia, British and German jets scrambled in response. They intercepted the Russian aircraft. Reports say the Russian aircraft failed to communicate with Estonia's air traffic controller. And such interceptions are not unprecedented. In fact, they happen all the time. About 400 times a year. You heard that right. NATO jets are involved in about 400 interceptions a year with Russian aircraft. That is more than one interception a day. So this one was not unusual. But it was serious given the context and the situation right now. There's a war raging on in Ukraine. Russia and America saw a mid-air collision. Even one step off the mark could lead to disaster. It seems the US and Russia are trying to avoid that. Their defense ministers spoke with each other. So did their military chiefs. The Russian defense minister told his American counterpart that American drone flights near Crimea's coast were provocative in nature and could lead to an escalation. In fact, let me quote from what he said. Russia had no interest in such a development, but will in future react in due proportion. This means Russia will not escalate this incident, but if it happens again, there will be an escalation. Back in Washington, Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin had something similar to say. Listen to this.
I won't speak for Minister Shoigu, nor will I get into the details of our discussion. I'll just reiterate that the United States will fly and operate wherever international law allows. Now, we take any potential for escalation very seriously, and that's why I believe it's important to keep the lines of communication open. I think it's really key that we're able to pick up the phone and engage each other.
Meanwhile, Russia is trying to retrieve the debris of the crashed American drone, and this may pose another challenge. Because remember what the drone was doing. It was gathering intelligence. It was on a reconnaissance mission. It was collecting intelligence for the US, possibly for it to be shared with Ukraine. Moscow would want to examine it. And even without the intelligence, the drone's wreckage could be useful to Moscow. Russia would be interested in the drone's technology, how it was built, what led to the crash, perhaps even its potential weaknesses. But recovering the debris will not be easy. This area where the drone fell has a depth of 4,000 to 5,000 feet. And before it crashed, the US is said to have wiped out all the data in it. So whatever intelligence was collected may have been removed before the crash. Yet Russia wants to try its luck. What about the US? Will the US also look for the debris? Highly unlikely. Recovering the remains would require the involvement of the American Navy. And the American Navy in the Black Sea, in the middle of Russia's war in Ukraine, would set off a chain reaction. If the drone crash did not escalate into a conflict, the US Navy's presence in the Black Sea definitely will. So World War III may not happen just yet, and thank God for that, but a nuclear disaster is a strong possibility. 2.5 tons of nuclear material is missing. We're talking about concentrated uranium, 10 drums of it. It has gone missing from Libya. This is according to the IAEA, the International Atomic Energy Agency, the global nuclear watchdog. The fact that it's missing is bad enough, and that it's missing from Libya is worse. Now, this is a war-torn country. It's not clear who has laid their hands on 10 drums of concentrated uranium. The IAEA says it poses a radiological risk, not to mention the nuclear security concerns here. Remember, uranium is a radioactive element and it can be used to make nuclear bombs. Now, the IAEA is investigating the circumstances of its removal, and it may be difficult considering the situation in Libya. Here's a primer. Libya is an African nation with huge deposits of oil. Until 2011, it was ruled by a dictator called Muammar Gaddafi. In 2011, he was ousted in a NATO-backed uprising. And since then, the country has been in the throes of conflict. It is divided. Multiple armed groups have tried to control it. At present, there are two main factions. One is a UN-backed provisional government based out of the capital, Tripoli. And the other is the so-called Libyan National Army, led by military commander Khalifa Haftar. Haftar controls Libya's oil-rich east. Over the years, he's been backed by countries who want Libya's oil. Countries like France, Russia, Egypt, and the UAE, they've all supported Haftar at various points in time. Turkey has supported the government in Tripoli. So it has devolved into a proxy war, and ordinary Libyans have been caught in the crossfire. Now it seems nuclear fuel is being added to this fire. While the IAEA did not get into the specifics, it said the missing uranium had not been under Tripoli's control, meaning it is likely that Haftar's group controlled this material, and that is a very dangerous prospect. We are talking about an armed rebel group with nuclear fuel. They could have sold it for weapons, or they could be planning to use it, and we may never know. The uranium was a legacy of the Gaddafi years. This was when Libya was trying to make nuclear weapons. In 2003, Libya gave up that ambition. It declared its nuclear stockpiles. And that's how the IAEA knew where to look. But now that the stock is missing, we have literally tons of nuclear fuel unaccounted for. And this could have been prevented. The IAEA says it conducts checks every year. The watchdog was supposed to check on it last year as well. But the check was postponed because of Libya's security situation. And now we hear that 10 barrels have gone missing. The fuel is uranium ore concentrate, also known as UOC. Some of you may have heard of something called yellow cake. It is one of the most famous forms of UOC. Of course, there are other types that come in various colors. The IAEA has not specified exactly what is missing here, but all forms of UOC are a starting point for uranium fuel. And thankfully, a lot more work needs to be done before they can be used for weapons. But UOC can still be hazardous to human health, even in this form. So what happens now? Investigating the theft is just addressing the symptom. The bigger problem is Libya's instability, and that remains unresolved. Peace needs to come to Libya to prevent such problems from arising again. The United Nations is pushing for elections.
And from what we know, it would be possible if the electoral laws are put in place in June, by the end of the year, to have this election to take place.
The proxy war for oil needs to stop. The foreign players need to back off. Democracy needs to be given a chance in this country. If not, the reckless pursuit of oil and power could lead to a nuclear disaster. Vantage continues after a short break.
Just peace, and there are differences of opinion, and how do you make sure that the Russian economy is not facilitating this war? And of course, that's where there's been disagreements with the United States. But my hope is that India ultimately will be part of the solution in having Russia recognize that they can't take Ukraine's sovereignty and having a just.
On to India now. It is making its presence felt in the global arms bazaar, not as a buyer. India is already the world's biggest defense buyer. This time we're talking about made in India weapons being sold in the international market. And India has been making strides. Another major deal could be finalized soon. Indonesia wants to buy the BrahMos missile. The negotiations are underway. The deal could be worth at least $200 million. The BrahMos is a supersonic cruise missile. It can be fired from land, airplanes, and even submarines. India developed it in collaboration with Russia. The Indian Defence Forces already have the BrahMos in their arsenal, and now India wants to use it to boost its defence exports. The BrahMos is an important component in that plan. The missile has generated a lot of interest in Southeast Asia in particular. Last year, India clinched its first deal. The Philippines bought the BrahMos. This deal was worth $375 million. It included 3 missile batteries, training for the operators, and a logistics support package. When will the Philippines get the BrahMos? The first deliveries are expected this year. Reports say Manila wants more. The Philippines is looking at procuring more BrahMos systems. And how will they use it? Reports say the Philippines wants to deploy the BrahMos on its shores. The plan is to use it as an anti-ship missile, meaning it can be used to take out enemy ships. And Indonesia has similar needs. After all, both of them have the same security challenge. It's called China. This is about the South China Sea. It is one of the biggest territorial disputes of our times. The region is rich in oil and gas. There are tons of fish. Trade worth over $3 trillion passes through these waters. China wants to control the entire South China Sea. But 5 other players stake claim to the islands and the waters: Taiwan, Vietnam, the Philippines, Malaysia, and Brunei. They have competing and sometimes overlapping claims. China is getting serious about controlling this region. It now has the world's largest navy. It is building islands and airstrips. It is expanding its military presence in the South China Sea, and this poses a threat for other countries here. Countries like Indonesia and the Philippines. Now, the Philippines is involved in a direct dispute in the South China Sea. Indonesia is not. But it has interests in the same waters, and it wants to protect key shipping lanes. So both countries are ramping up their military procurements. They're investing in new weapons. In fact, I have some data. Indonesia's investment shot up to 69% in 2022. And the Philippines saw a rise of 40%. And some of this spending is set to come India's way. That is the biggest takeaway. Make in India in defense is finally taking off. New Delhi has set an ambitious goal. It wants to export $5 billion worth of arms by 2025. The BrahMos is just the beginning. It serves 2 purposes: meeting India's defense export goals and sending a message to China. India is arming like-minded partners against Chinese aggression. More countries in the region are interested. Reports say India is in talks with Vietnam, Malaysia, Thailand, and Myanmar. The first 3 countries on this list are involved in the South China Sea dispute. So is this payback for the border provocation in the Himalayas? We'd say that's one way of looking at it. And now let's talk about Saudi Arabia and its old and new friends, the US and China. A turf war is going on. Last week, the US suffered humiliation at the hands of the Chinese. Beijing brokered a deal between Riyadh and Tehran. The two West Asian powers will resume diplomatic relations. And the US was not involved in this breakthrough in its supposed backyard. Now the US has hit back. America is using that old weapon, the human rights record of Saudi Arabia. The US Congress wants it investigated. And we know what they'll find, even if they conduct a peripheral probe. So what is America trying to do here? The headlines may seem confusing. On the one hand, the US is selling airplanes to the Saudis. On the other, it is talking about human rights and stopping security assistance. In the next few minutes, we'll connect the dots to construct the big picture. Let's start with the planes. This week, American aviation giant Boeing announced a record deal with Saudi Arabia. It will supply at least 78 planes to two Saudi airlines. There's also an option for Riyadh to buy another 43 planes. Now, this move is seen as a big win for the US airline industry, and the White House reportedly played a part in securing this deal.
The Saudi deal alone will support more than 140,000 American jobs at over 300 Boeing suppliers across 38 states. This partnership is also another milestone in 8 decades of cooperation between Saudi Arabia and the American industry. The administration looks forward to working with Saudi Arabia and all partners in the Middle East to support a more prosperous, secure, integrated region, which of course ultimately benefits the national security and the economic interests of the American people.
That was John Kirby, the spokesperson of the National Security Council. He says the US administration looks forward to working with Saudi Arabia. But the US Congress is making that difficult. US senators have introduced a resolution. If it passes, the government will be forced to make a report. A report about what? About Saudi Arabia's human rights record. Now, this is a bold move. The new resolution will trigger a clause in America's Foreign Assistance Act. The Biden administration will be on the clock. They will have 30 days to submit the report on Saudi human rights. And if they don't do this, all security assistance to Saudi Arabia will automatically stop. So the government is in a bind, damned if they do and damned if they don't. It's a big blow to Biden's plans of working with Saudi Arabia. And the interesting thing is this. His own party is taking him to task on this. The resolution was jointly introduced by both Democrats and Republicans. So has Joe Biden lost control of his party? Or is something else at play? Could the US be using the age-old carrot and stick approach? Remember, US ties with Saudi Arabia have been at historic lows during Biden's tenure. His campaign promises to make Saudi Arabia a pariah state were not well received. This was over the killing of journalist Jamal Khashoggi. Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman is said to have been responsible for the murder. Taking on the Crown Prince backfired on Joe Biden, and no amount of fist bumps have helped repair the frosty relationship. So now perhaps Washington is reminding Riyadh about the benefits of American ties. The planes are the carrot. Withdrawing security assistance is the stick. And that stick would really hurt Riyadh. 8 decades of assistance is not easy to replace. Riyadh's entire security apparatus runs on US equipment. Analysts say it would take decades for Saudi Arabia to replace it with Chinese arms. And the costs would be staggering, even for an oil-rich nation like Saudi Arabia. So is Riyadh willing to pay that price? Will shifting allegiances to Beijing be worth it? Washington has made its move. Now, Mohammed bin Salman has to decide the next step. We'll keep you updated with how this great game plays out. A Dragon is on its way to space, and this one is not Chinese, it's American. It's NASA's latest mission, a SpaceX capsule called Dragon. It was launched yesterday in Florida. Dragon is expected to reach the International Space Station today. Remember, the ISS is NASA's laboratory in space. And Dragon is basically a cargo shipment. It is carrying more than 6,000 pounds of supplies, including spacewalk equipment. It will conduct several experiments in space, and this will be the Dragon's 35th visit to the space station. Our next report tells you more.
3, 2, 1.
It was a countdown like any other at NASA's Kennedy Space Center in Florida. The space agency was gearing up to launch a Dragon into space. This was the Dragon capsule. It was in collaboration with Elon Musk's company SpaceX. Fitted on top of a Falcon 9 rocket, a golden streak was witnessed in the night sky, a sight to behold. The Dragon began making its way to the International Space Station. The International Space Station is NASA's laboratory in the sky. Astronauts live and work there to understand more about life beyond Earth. So what is the Dragon capsule and why is it heading to space? Dragon is a compact spacecraft by SpaceX. It's capable of carrying both humans and cargo to and from the Earth. SpaceX says Dragon has already made 34 visits to the International Space Station. The latest one is an autonomously operated robotic spacecraft, meaning it can function independently in space. It's being sent primarily as a cargo mission, the 27th such resupply mission by the company. And what's it expected to do? Conduct scientific experiments in space and bring the results back to Earth. The Dragon capsule is carrying more than 6,200 pounds of cargo. This includes food supplies like apples, blueberries, and cheese for astronauts. It's also carrying spacewalk equipment and vehicle hardware. And here's the most interesting and unlikely part of the cargo, a beating human heart tissue. You see, one of the key experiments that will be conducted in space pertains to the human heart. The experiment is called Cardinal Heart 2.0. It aims to understand the impact of weak gravity on human health, the heart in particular, and whether existing drugs are sufficient to prevent negative effects. This is a follow-up to an experiment that was done in 2020. NASA says the latest study will build up on it. The Dragon capsule is also fitted with a ball clamp monopod. This was developed by a bunch of high school students. What does this do? It aims to make filming easier in space. The Dragon has been used for transporting humans too. Most recently, another Dragon capsule called Endeavour helped 4 members of NASA's SpaceX mission come back to Earth.
It's a really smooth ride up and down. And one of the different things that I saw on the spacecraft, the Dragon, is during the re-entry, I was able to see the plasma of during the atmospheric entry. So we had like a firework and then with the glow of the air for a long time. So I was able to enjoy the light show during the entry. It was really impressive.
They returned after a 5-month-long stay. Minutes after takeoff, a part of the Falcon 9 rocket, or the first stage booster, made its way successfully back to Earth. It had already made a record. The recovery operation of the booster's landing on ground was done by an all-female crew, possibly a first for such a space mission. The Dragon capsule will be at the International Space Station for a month. After completing the experiments in space, it will return with a treasure trove of research and bring back the remaining cargo too. NASA says the point of such experiments is to help astronauts travel to space for longer spells. Most importantly, also provide evidence of life beyond Earth. Clearly, the sky is not the limit for these missions.
And now let's talk about the world of artificial intelligence, or AI. It's moving at lightning speed, and its hero just acquired a new superpower. What are we talking about? ChatGPT. It can now see. Its parent company OpenAI has released GPT-4. It is the latest version of the super hit AI chatbot. Think of it as an update. Just like our phones get a software update, ChatGPT has got an update too. But before we talk about this update that's making waves, let's understand once again what ChatGPT is. This chatbot was launched in November last year. It has been used by millions of people since. In fact, it added 100 million new users, in just 2 months after its launch. And this is the fastest ever growth. No other app or software has grown its user base at this speed. And what does it do? It can answer questions using human-like language. It can also mimic writing styles. It has cracked college-level entrance exams and written poems. It has also written code and suggested marketing copy. Where does it get this information to do all of this? It culls data from the internet. Its database has information up to 2021, so a bit outdated, but useful nonetheless. And GPT-4, the new version, will take all of this to the next level. It has learned to be more precise and accurate. It can now respond to images. Look at this visual. You will see how it analyzes an image and gives paragraphs of description. Similarly, if you show it a picture of ingredients and ask for a recipe option, it will tell you. This feature can be useful for visually impaired people. It can also process up to 25,000 words. This is 8 times as many as the previous model used by ChatGPT. It also has more advanced reasoning skills. Think of it as an engine that can power chatbots, search engines, and even online tutors. And who can use this? Who can use GPT-4? As of now, it's available to ChatGPT users with a premium subscription. That's $20 a month. It's already powering Microsoft's Bing search engine. Morgan Stanley Wealth Management is using it to build an information system. An online education company will use it to build an automated tutor. And OpenAI does not plan to stop here. In the long term, it wants the system to juggle between different media like sound, video, text, and images. As you can tell, the update is clearly an improvement, and it also comes with the same baggage as ChatGPT. But it also comes with the same baggage as ChatGPT. OpenAI spent 6 months on the safety features of GPT-4, but it can still not be trusted completely. It might hallucinate, which is tech language for AI inventing facts or making errors. And GPT-4 is an expert on some subjects, but it completely lacks knowledge about others. It can also offer precise medical knowledge, while it makes errors in basic math. But companies part of the AI chatbot race will have to put up with this imprecision, simply because of the way they have bet their future on this technology, like Microsoft, that has invested $10 billion in OpenAI. Another reason is the speed at which AI is developing. It has made the world unpredictable. Experts are calling it a tectonic shift, almost as crucial as the creation of web browsers in the 1990s. And OpenAI is not alone in the shift. Tech giants like Google and Meta are also working towards this goal. They're building their own chatbots and AI technology. This technology is at the cusp of changing work as we know it. It's exciting. It's also scary. Is AI coming for our jobs? There is disruption for sure. Some jobs might go, others might be created. Hopefully, we don't have to worry, because even the most impressive technology complements workers. But there are other risks too. This phase is seeing extremely powerful technology. And if we can learn one thing from history, it is that tech will be used for both good and evil. Ultimately, which direction this goes in lies in the hands of the companies that are developing it. So are they being transparent in where they get their information from? Are they policing the sources? What about the government? Will they be able to move quickly and establish legal guardrails for this kind of development? Looking at the government's experience with social media policies gives us an idea, and it's not very encouraging. But this can be seen as a cautionary tale. So we do better this time, because the worst risks could be the ones we can't even anticipate yet. Of course, the world does not have all the solutions right now, but one thing is undisputed. GPT-4 is a big step forward. Every short and accurate response by the technology is a giant leap for mankind. Stink is in the Parisian air, and the city of love is holding its nose. What are we talking about? The cobblestone streets of Paris are overflowing with garbage bins, more than 7,000 tons of it. Some piles of this foul-smelling rubbish are taller than pedestrians trying to avoid it. But why is the French capital stinking? For over a week, garbage workers in Paris and other parts of France have been on strike. They are protesting against President Emmanuel Macron's pension plan. It aims to raise the age of collecting government pension from 62 to 64. And it could become a law this week. And why is the government determined to force this plan? Why are workers across France pushing back? Also, what will become of this protest? Our next report tells you.
Spring is usually a magical time to visit Paris. But maybe not this year. A heady mix of love and foul smell is in the air. Garbage has become a smelly symbol of public outrage in France. Mounds of waste have piled up in Paris. They're blocking doorways, they're ornating the banks of the Seine, and choking the roads leading up to the Eiffel Tower. But this scenario is not limited to Paris. Other cities like Nantes, Rennes, and Le Havre are also affected. For over a week now, garbage workers in many parts of France have been on strike. They're protesting against the pension reform. President Emmanuel Macron plans to raise the age of collecting a government pension to 64 from the existing 62. After 2 months of political debates, the garbage workers are pushing back. And as they adorn the City of Lights with heaps of garbage, their work, or the lack of it, can be seen all over. There are large protests as the showdown over the bill heads towards a climax. The Senate adopted the bill this morning.
Résultat du scrutin.
The results are 345 voters, voted 307, voted for 193, against 114. The Senate has adopted the pension reform bill.
The bill has now moved to the lower house. There are some big questions as its fate remains uncertain. Leftists and far-right lawmakers are strongly opposed, while conservatives are divided. But what about the French president? He considers it crucial to make the economy competitive. Will he be able to garner enough support? And if Macron can't get a majority vote, will he force it through his constitutional authority? But why does he want to impose the unpopular legislation? You see, France is on course to run a deficit, so he wants workers to put more money into the system. And France is not the only European country facing economic challenges. There is widespread unrest across Western Europe. Teachers, doctors, and public transport staff are protesting in Britain. They're demanding higher wages to match the rising prices. Meanwhile, Spain has raised its social security costs for higher wage earners, calling it a historic deal to save the pension system. But coming back to the French, they enjoy one of the most generous retirement systems. It provides a golden, lengthy third stage of life. They see it as a way to rest after a lifetime of labor. But there's a crack in the system, at least according to the government. While current workers continue to pay for the pension of retirees, people are living longer and the number of pensioners is growing. This can cause long-term deficits. But what are the people of France saying?
Unfortunately, this social democracy was not sufficiently listened to. We were never in a warlike logic. We are in a logic of social conflict that is rooted and won't disappear tomorrow.
We will get it out. We are going to go all the way. We can't let it go. I've been working in the sewers for 38 years. It is impossible. So if they don't get it, we'll keep going and going until the end, until we stop it.
Even if the reform goes through passes, the inequality gaps, especially for women, will be present. So we must indeed be on the street and always ready to fight this reform.
They oppose this system for a number of reasons. There is no immediate threat of bankruptcy. They say Macron has ignored other ways of increasing funding. Why can't he just tax the wealthy? Deficit threat or not, we say that's a good question to ponder over. Many also say the garbage workers have a lower life expectancy as compared to business executives. So for them, 2 years is a lot. Others see this as a threat to their values. They're calling it a denial of democracy.
Of course, we will respect the law and we will respect the vote if there is one. That does not mean that we will approve the law.
While the debate continues, few people think this bill will be pulled back. With over 7,000 tons of garbage on the roads and the threat of rats and infection looming large, we don't know whether the protests will continue if this becomes a law. But one thing is sure, the garbage stink will haunt the Macron government. The voters could punish his party in next year's European Parliament elections. If the government continues to turn their nose to the foul smell of this protest, the ramifications could leave a bitter aftertaste on the ballot.
And finally, it's time for Vantage Shots, images that tell the story. We're starting with Israel. Protests continue against the judicial reform proposed by the government. People painted the town red, quite literally, to show their resentment. In the Central American country of El Salvador, gang violence has been on the rise. Some 2,000 gang members have been sent to a new prison. And here's a disclaimer. These images may be disturbing to some viewers. In California, several properties have been damaged because of heavy rains. A mudslide left a swimming pool hanging off a cliff. And finally, a man was saved from a raging river in Los Angeles. We'll show you the dramatic rescue operation. We're leaving you with these visuals. Thanks for watching. We'll see you tomorrow.